Our panel, let me invite to the stage Ambassador Winid, former ambassador to NATO and United Nations. It's a great pleasure to have you with us. Bogusław Winid. Alex Storozynski, the chairman of the board of trustees of Kosciuszko Foundation, the legend among Polish-American journalists, Pulitzer Prize laureate, great person, great friend of Poland. And Marcin, Wrona, my hero, a legend among Polish correspondents, in general, among foreign correspondents in Washington. Great to have you, gentlemen. As you know, Alex wrote a fantastic book about our host, the greatest one here, Tadeusz Kosciuszko. Alex, you have to tell us, how did you fall in love with Kosciuszko? Why we all should fall in love with this incredible man?
Well, when I was reading about Kosciuszko and the fact that he had done so much in the American Revolution, but that he also left his estate to free enslaved Africans, this was shocking for me. But also the Kosciuszko Foundation gave me a scholarship and paid for my tuition at Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. So thanks to that, I became a journalist. And then the president at the time was giving me books about Kosciuszko, and I read more and more about him, and I decided I want to write a book about him. And just his beginning in America, which people don't realize, is he took a ship across the Atlantic, which crashed in a hurricane on a reef off of Martinique. And he literally swam on the mast to shore. He was determined to survive.
No, seriously, that's how he got to America?
That's how he got to America.
I love it.
And now he's in Martinique, where he just survived a hurricane, and he gets on fishing boats. And the fishing boats eventually take him to Philadelphia and to the Delaware River. And he walks into Benjamin Franklin's print shop and says, "My name is Tadeusz Kosciuszko. I've come to take your test for military engineering because I want to join the Continental Army." And Benjamin Franklin peered over his glasses and said, "Who are you? What is this test you want to take?" And he says, "Military engineering." And he says, "We're a country of farmers and merchants. We don't have an army, much less a test for military engineering. And you came all this way without any letters of recommendation?" He said, "No, but I graduated from the Royal Military Academy, the Royal Night School in Warsaw. I studied at the French Military Academy in Paris, and I want to show what I can do based on merit." And then Ben Franklin asked him about his politics and said, "All right, I have a good feeling about you." He said, "We don't know anything about military engineering, but we have a guy who knows a lot about geometry. Come, he'll give you a geometry test." So he takes this geometry test, he aces it, he knows more than the test giver, and Ben Franklin says, "Good, you're in charge of building forts." And he started building forts, and he built forts to protect Philadelphia. And the forts that he built were so impressive that the British decided not to attack Philadelphia. And then they sent him up north to New York State, to Fort Ticonderoga. And he said, "See that mountain there? Put a cannon up there. And that'll guard Fort Ticonderoga." And the Americans said, "We can't get a cannon up there. Who is this Polish guy? Be quiet." So the British come down from Canada, they put a cannon up there and shoot into the fort. And now they have to flee. And they said, "All right, Kosciuszko, you guard the rear. Cover us while we escape." So he started chopping down trees, blocking roads, flooding the roads, and the Americans now went south. They went down, they made it to a place on the river, and Kosciuszko rides down, and they're setting up camp on the river. And he said, "What are you doing? I keep telling you, guard the high ground. From that mountain, they could shoot the boot buckles off your shoes." And so General Gates says, "Okay, you find a spot where we're going to make our stand." So Kosciuszko rides, and he finds a place called Bemis Heights. And Bemis Heights was where the Americans won the Battle of Saratoga. He forced the British to march uphill into a trap. And because of this, the Americans won the Battle of Saratoga. They captured thousands of British soldiers, and that was the turning point of the American Revolution. After that, France joined the revolution on the American side, and they decided that they're going to build a fort on the bend in the Hudson River called West Point. And this painting is of Kosciuszko at West Point. And he built this fort, and he built a chain across the river. And because of the forts that he built, the British never even tried to attack them.
Alex, why don't you say a few more words about the chain across the river? Because this is an amazing idea that he had.
So this chain was so important because there's a bend in the Hudson. The Hudson River at the time was split America in half, the colonies. The revolution started in New England, and the southern states weren't really convinced yet to be part of the revolution. So Washington said, we have to control this river. So they stretched the chain, giant iron links. If you go to West Point today, you can see this chain. It still exists, these giant iron links. And the tallest statue at West Point today is of Kosciuszko looking out over the river. So they stretched this chain across the river and put a fort down, you know, shooting in case the British ships tried to cross. Because the chain would go up. If the British ships came, they pulled the chain up and they couldn't go, you know, because they said, we want to divide and conquer. If we control the Hudson, we will divide and conquer the United States. And then he said, no, you know, we need forts on top of these other hills as well. And the French said, no, 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 the greatest builder of forts of all time was the Marquis de Vauban. And Kosciuszko said, I studied Vauban in Paris. I know him quite well, and he would have done that there. So George Washington came. George Washington spelled Kosciuszko's name 11 different ways. Until he
Not bad at all.
Until he met him. And after he met him, he learned how to pronounce Kosciuszko. He learned how to spell his name correctly and said, everyone here is going to listen to Kosciuszko at West Point. He's in charge of building the forts. So the role that he played in the American Revolution was quite significant.
It was, Alex. Thank you so much. But it's not, if you want a round of applause for Alex for that story, yeah, sure, thank you. Great idea. But you may be surprised. It's not the beginning of the story of Polish people in America. Kosciuszko and Pulaski were not first citizens of Poland coming to America. And Marcin knows that story because he made a story about Polish people in Jamestown. And this is the place actually where America was born.
TVN covered the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the first ship to Jamestown. It was in 2007. Queen Elizabeth II came to this celebration. And when we were working on our story, I asked myself a question. Because, you know, guys, we are everywhere, right? Poles are everywhere. So were Poles present on the first ships arriving to Jamestown? The first ship arrived in 1607. We were not on that one, but we were on the third ship that arrived in 1608. There were 4 Poles and 4 Dutch. This is what you can find in the old manuscripts. So first, 4 Polish citizens came to what is now the United States in 1608. Now, there are 14 references to Poles in Jamestown, and they were basically making glass. That was their trade. So we have Poles here in the United States since the very early years of the colonies. Now, when we talk about Kosciuszko, Alex, you of course know that at the Lafayette Park there is a Kosciuszko statue. There are at 4 corners of the Lafayette Park, which is right in front of the White House, there are 4 statues for the international heroes who helped the United States gain independence. And Tadeusz Kościuszko has his statue, which was unveiled in 1910. On the same very day, that was May 11th of 1910, Kazimierz Pulaski's statue was unveiled at what is now Freedom Plaza. And let me say that the President of the United States, President Taft, when he was unveiling those statues, he said, "It is idle to speculate what might have become the success of American arms in the War of the Revolution had we not been assisted by foreign nations and subjects of foreign countries." And he was talking about Pulaski and Kościuszko. And he says, it is fitting that there should be erected monuments like this to have it understood that America is grateful and holds in sweet memory those who came to her in her hour of danger and of trouble. So that's what President Taft said in 1910. Now today, I decided to get out of my hotel, stand at the corner of 36 and 8. I printed this. It has 3 names of Poles who may be known to Americans. Tadeusz Kosciuszko, Kazimierz Pulaski, and Robert Lewandowski. Because Robert Lewandowski will probably be playing for Chicago Fire. And I asked 10 random people, showing them the names. Do those names mean anything to you? Tadeusz Kosciuszko, 10 zeros. Kazimierz Pulaski, only 2 people were familiar with the name. And same with Robert Lewandowski, which surprised me, to be honest. Now, we have Kosciuszko Bridge in Queens. We have Pulaski Skyway between Jersey City and Newark in New Jersey, right across the river. And people do not remember now who those heroes were. So the words of President Taft are kind of forgotten, as our Polish-American heroes are. And it is our job as journalists, as historians, as diplomats to make people aware that we did play a huge role in the history of the United States.
Alex did his job. He wrote a book. So
A
he did his part.
Made a film.
Yeah,
Documentary film.
And we should make a film about Chaim Solomon. What an incredible story about this fantastic banker, the second richest person.
I'm glad that you mentioned Chaim Solomon and the dollar and the legend, but something Chaim Solomon did was even more important. Because Chaim Solomon, when he came to New York, he hung a shingle on 22 Wall Street, and he started every business imaginable, and he started making a lot of money. And when the Americans started capturing ships, British ships that were coming with supplies, Chaim Solomon, they gave those supplies to Chaim Solomon, and he sold them. And they took that money and they used it for the revolution. And as a result of this, the British arrested him here in New York and said he's a spy. Well, he escaped from prison and he went to Philadelphia. And he opened in a coffee shop, basically the first stock market in the United States, in this coffee shop. And he started making so much money, and he started meeting the founding fathers, and he started lending them money. But the loans that he gave were never really repaid. He didn't really want the money back. And one of the people that he kept loaning money to was James Madison. And the reason was because James Madison was the one who was pushing for freedom of religion, all religions, and that included Jews. And James Madison and Chaim Solomon became good friends, and as a result of his investment, that's part of the reason we have freedom of religion. And when Chaim Solomon died at the age of 45, there were
Penniless.
No, there were more than,
poor at it.
but there were receipts from more than $350,000 of loans to people like Kosciuszko and Pulaski and James Madison. He made all this money and gave it away to the founding fathers to fund the revolution. And that's such a big role that he played.
If you find descendants of Chaim Solomon, probably the federal government owes them $2.5 trillion in today's money. But we have Madison Avenue. Why we shouldn't? I think we should change the name of Fifth Avenue to Solomon Avenue. He deserves that, right?
There's a statue. There's a statue of Chaim Solomon in Philadelphia.
Yeah, true, and in Chicago.
And in Chicago.
It's Morris, Washington, and Chaim Solomon. Ambassador, was it an obligation for a Polish diplomat traveling to the U.S. to know biography of Kosciuszko and Pulaski to use it in diplomatic negotiations?
Well, I remember we were together in 2005 participating in the burial ceremony of Kazimierz Pulaski. And Kazimierz Pulaski is kind of a missing link in our discussion so far. And this is fascinating how different they were. This is how diversified Poles were, even in the 18th century. One coming from the basically Grand Duchy of Lithuania, and Pulaski is, a son of Mazovia. He was not educated, not geometry, nothing like that, not military education. Well, Pulaski was a little bit troublemaker, we should say. He had kind of a strange ideas of hijacking Polish king. Okay, you need some brain to do this. He was basically a political refugee in Paris. And when he came to the United States, basically to somehow he behaved similarly. And, dealing with the American bureaucracy, even during those days, which was based on the British bureaucracy, colonials were actually copying the British examples. So Puławski was always kind of a troublemaker. And sometimes he saved Washington in Brandywine battle. But unfortunately in Savannah, it went a little bit wrong. A little bit wrong, he was killed. Of course, we should say this was because of the French, of course. They made the mistakes. Puławski was trying to...
They were running away.
No, they were not running away.
And he was trying to get them to attack.
They were attacking in the wrong direction. Puławski was trying to,
Also known as running away.
Diplomatically...
This is a diplomat.
He was trying to save the battle, and unfortunately, he was hit probably by the big cannon from the sea, actually. And he died, basically 2 or 3 days ago on the French warship, and his remains were discovered 2005, 2004, 2005. It was.
He was reburied in 2000.
And we were much younger then, but.
But it was amazing to be present at the funeral of the hero of the Revolutionary War. In 2005.
Okay, and coming back to the current reality, or even during those days, the popularity of Puławski in the southern states is much more visible than here in Midwest or in New York, because here at Savannah there are still families actually whose ancestors had participated in this battle, and some were not very well oriented and actually followed Puławski in this charge, which went badly. So they still remembered. And of course this is used also. Look, for example, about our frigates which we get from the United States in the beginning of the century. One was named Kosciuszko, the second was named Puławski. So this is kind of a living memory. But no one actually established as big foundation like Kosciuszko Foundation,
and the
Pulaski Foundation.
But the reason for that is Kosciuszko's dedication to education. Kosciuszko said, "We are all equal. The only difference is wealth and education. Some of us have more of it than others." And that's why the Kosciuszko Foundation was started, to get people who have wealth and educate those who want to start their careers. And that's why we follow his example.
But in military, we need both characters.
Yeah, true. But Kosciuszko was lucky enough to live until the victory of the Revolutionary War. Pulaski.
And it was his idea to put a military academy at West Point. And he wrote to Thomas Jefferson, who eventually did that, and said, it's not important just to teach them how to fight. We have to teach them the principles of democracy and to defend that democracy. He was dedicated to defending democracy and education. That's why he was made a citizen of France during the French Revolution.
But I will argue that in American military, actually, tradition of Puławski is more visible because he's known as the father of American cavalry. So if you will ask each and every American cavalry officer, armored cavalry right now, they will know about Puławski, because this is kind of a tradition of...
But at West Point, they do learn... I went with the Polish troops to Iraq 20 years ago. And I'm in the desert in Iraq. We're walking into a tent to eat something. And these American soldiers see me speaking in Polish, and they say, what you speaking in Polish? How do you know Polish? I said, well, my parents were from Poland. And so I told them, about that I was writing this book about Kosciuszko, and they said, oh yeah, we study Kosciuszko at West Point. The biggest statue of him is, so the officers all know about Kosciuszko.
But it's a great story also about George Washington, because just before the Battle of Brandywine, Pulaski was asking Washington for any job. And he said, you know, you have to ask the Congress, but it's going to take some time. But after the Battle of Brandywine, when Pulaski saved Washington's life, on the very next day, Washington offered him to be the leader of the American cavalry, and he became the general one day later. So Washington, as a manager, could make quick reactions and quick decisions. But Alex, I love your book. Because one of the reasons why I love your book is it's not only the story of the military and engineering, but this is a love story. So tell us the love story of Tadeusz Kościuszko.
Well, Kosciuszko studied in Paris, and he studied all the same people that Thomas Jefferson did, John Locke, and he started, Francis Bacon and science and all these people. He was a child of the Enlightenment. But one of the people he was most affected by was a guy named Francois Quesnay, who had this philosophy called physiocracy. And physiocracy was basically, it's where the first term, laissez-faire, hands off. And Quesnay wrote that the reason we have wealth, the people who own the land are wealthy, but who is making them wealthy? The peasants that farm that land for them. So we need hands off these peasants, let the peasants get more of the fruits of their labor. So Kosciuszko was taken by this. He wanted to free the peasants in Poland and Europe. He wanted to free, African Americans enslaved here. And he goes back to Poland, and he can't get a job in the army. So he takes a job tutoring the daughter of one of the richest men in Poland, Ludwiga Sosnowska, and he's teaching her French. And he starts telling her about physiocracy. And Ludwiga says, "Psh, when you were in Paris doing your fancy drawings at these military academies, my sister and I translated the first book about physiocracy from French into Polish. So we know more about physiocracy than you do." And that was it. He fell in love with her. And he wanted to marry her. But he wasn't wealthy enough. And they tried to elope. And the father caught them and stopped them from eloping, and the father, Lord Sosnowski, said, "Listen, pigeons are not meant for sparrows. And people of the common gentry are not meant for the daughters of land magnates." And they beat him up, they took the daughter back, and Kosciuszko had to flee because they wanted to arrest him for kidnapping this daughter.
Gentlemen, let's talk about present times a little. And I would like to ask you how the image of Poland was changed over the years. Marcin, you are here for the last almost 30 years or even more than that. And what was the image of Poland when you got here for the very first time? And how does it look now?
Oh, it's so different. I started coming to the United States in 1991. It was a scholarship for young, promising journalists, co-organized by Rutgers University, not far from here. One of the participants, by the way, is the deputy foreign minister in Poland now. Since then, I was coming to the United States at least once a year, and I've been here as the Washington bureau chief of TVN for the past 20 years. So let me talk about three things. In 1990s, people who thought they were funny, they were telling me Polish jokes. It doesn't happen anymore. There are no Polish jokes present. It tells you about how the perspective changed. So that's one. Two, there are no more Polish death camps in American press. And we talked before our discussion, Piotr, about Barack Obama and Jan Karski. When Jan Karski was awarded the highest American honor at the White House, and Barack Obama did say this horrible phrase, Polish death camp. And that was probably the most widely discussed moment And something changed after that. Americans realized that the history of Poland is different than this phrase. There were no Polish death camps. There were German death camps in occupied Poland. So this also changed. Another thing, we used to be put in the same basket as other countries that were, for example, a part of the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe. Now, more and more Americans realize that Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary are in Central Europe. And this also is kind of a common knowledge now. And the last thing, what Poles did after Russia invaded Ukraine was so significant that my colleagues, people who had no idea I'm a journalist, would come to me, but knowing that I'm Polish, would come to me and talk about the amazing deeds that were done by Polish citizens in helping Ukraine. So this image changed a lot. And what's more, young Americans are talking about visiting Poland now. You know, when I came here for the first time and I was saying I'm from Poland, people were very often saying, oh, Holland, Amsterdam is a nice city. No, Poland, not Holland. Now, when I'm saying I'm from Poland, they are reacting with Warsaw is beautiful, Krakow is amazing, because Poland has a very strong presence in the consciousness of the society. So those are huge, huge changes. Poland is definitely a powerhouse now, and Americans know it, Americans realize it.
So, Mr. Ambassador, yeah.
I just want to say something about this Polish death camps, because the Kosciuszko Foundation played a role in this too.
Oh, of course.
Probably even more
and
than
the diplomats
than
Kosciuszko
Barack
Foundation,
Obama.
yes.
Because when I was a journalist, all the Polish diplomats would come into New York and say, how do we stop this Polish death camp thing? Mm-hmm. And they said, we're going to sue them. We're going to sue the newspapers. I said, that's not going to work. The Polish veterans here in New York said, we're going to sing Polish songs in front of the Wall Street Journal, and that will stop them. And I said, no, you have to change the style book. You have to change the Associated Press style book. Because the style book is like the dictionary of the Associated Press. The New York Times has its style book. The Wall Street Journal has its style book. So the Kosciuszko Foundation published a petition that was signed by more than 300,000 people, including Lech Wałęsa, Zbigniew Brzezinski, Polish presidents, members of Congress. And that put the pressure on these newspapers to change their style books. Mm-hmm. And so now, when they do make a mistake and use that phrase, we point to that style book and say, no, you're not allowed to use this. So that's the real reason they changed it.
That's true. And Alex, I also remember you calling me after Obama talked about Polish death camps. And I remember your email sent from Kosciuszko Foundation on that very day, trying to quickly explain that he was wrong and that it needs to be straightened out. I remember it very, very vividly. Alex was incredibly active at that time, and yes, it's definitely true what you're saying, and it did shift the whole narrative about that.
I want to ask you about NATO, Mr. Ambassador, because a week ago in TVN24, we are celebrating this incredible moment when a jewel in the crown of the American military, F-35, were flying over our beautiful country. And that was an amazing moment. And now it seems to be obvious that we are a NATO member. But it wasn't inevitable in the middle of the 90s. I remember a conversation with Thomas Friedman, one of the most respected American journalists from the New York Times. And at that time, there were three ideas in the US. We can invite Poles, Czechs, and Hungarians to NATO. We can abandon the whole idea, or we can invite Russians, because this Yeltsin seems to be a nice guy. And it wasn't such an obvious decision for Americans which scenario is the best one. So how hard was the job to convince Congress, President, the White House, in general, the American public opinion, that it's a good idea to enlarge NATO towards East?
Yeah, well, we can say that this was our glory days. Like this famous Bruce Springsteen song. This was glory days. Actually, when we look at this 250 years, I would argue that we have two such kind of a glory days. At the beginning and at the end of the 20th century. At the beginning, 2010, 1910s, 1920s, when we regained independence, Woodrow Wilson and so on. And in 1990s, when we regain our independence, our sovereignty, and, initially it was also economic stabilization. Polish economy was in ruin. I mean, we don't remember it now, but this was extremely difficult. And of course, security, which is NATO. And this was one of the most successful political campaign actually we had in our history, definitely in the 20th century. This was multi-layer, as we say, activity. And we had a lot of support, and we had a lot of friends. I mean, let's be very frank. And we did our homework in Poland. We had very good team. We can mention Ambassador Kosciuszko, who was then like a coach of the whole team. He was like a star of Polish diplomacy. But also, we have quite good players, to put it. Because even if you are a star in the football team, you need some players who will actually stop the ball and actually pass the ball to you. So our colleagues were doing tremendous job also in Brussels, Berlin, London, Paris. And of course, we were doing our job in Washington. But let me also mention that we had tremendous support from Americans of Polish descent and American politicians from both sides. This was bipartisan idea. There were some strange ideas, as you mentioned, inviting Russia to NATO. Yeah, well, this is America. It's freedom. I mean, you can have all ideas you like. If I can mention just some names, I mean, this is just, to remember some of our friends who in some cases are no longer with us. But Senator Paul Simon from Illinois, great leader. Barbara Mikulski from Maryland. I mean, without her, this will be impossible. Senator Hank Brown, Republican from Colorado. Jesse Helms, very conservative from Carolina, leader of the Republican Party in the Senate.
Richard Lugar.
Richard Lugar, yes, from Indiana. Joe Biden, who was actually leading the debate in the U.S. Senate. But also, during those days, in 1990s, there were very prominent representation of Polish Americans in the U.S., especially House of Representatives. And, some of these leaders are no longer with us, but let us remember Dan Rostenkowski from Chicago, who was basically running Ways and Means Committee in the House of Representatives, one of the most important commission in the House. John Dingell from Michigan, who was also a chairman of dealing with the economy. So this was a good team, good opportunity, good environment. We had some bumps. I mean, there were some, now we can say, funny elements. Sometimes we need sense of humor in diplomacy. But the end is that now, as you very rightly said, we are one of the powerhouse in NATO. And, this was not only one-way street. This is not only that Americans are coming to Poland, that we are buying American equipment. We also paid very high price in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I think in this program we should mention that 28 very brave Polish soldiers lost their life in Iraq, and 44 officers and soldiers and civilians lost their life in Afghanistan. So thanks to their sacrifice, we can celebrate this success right now. Sometimes this is forgotten, and this is, I can tell you, this is one of my dreams. Alex wrote a book about Kosciuszko. Someone should write a book for American public about our participation in operation in Afghanistan. This is not that well known, and sometimes you have Even now you have comments that, what the Allies did in Afghanistan.
But even in Iraq, General Roman Polko, GRUM Special Forces, the first day of the war.
Exactly.
He went and he captured the port at Qasr and turned off all the oil, because in the first Gulf War, Saddam blew it all up and set it on fire. And Roman Polko and the GRUM forces turned it off and stopped it, and their battle was heroic.
And just before the first Gulf War, General Czempiński saved lives of the American officers in Iraq.
Smuggled CIA
Yeah,
agents
it's a
out of
great
Iraq.
story. It's
Yeah.
a great movie about it. But Ambassador, let me ask you about the day when you realized, yes, we are going to join NATO, because with Marcin, we are present at the first NATO summit in Washington, D.C., when Poland was there as a member. But how does it feel for you, the moment when you realize, yes, we won the battle, we are going to join NATO?
Okay, this was probably in Independence, Missouri, when the Polish delegation, I was a junior member of the Polish delegation, actually, for the signing of the NATO enlargement. And to be very honest, I was overwhelmed by organizing some kind of details for Professor Geremek, the foreign minister. When you have this very prominent visit, there's always someone, actually, who is scheduling everything, moving stuff from one place to another. But I had kind of a strange feeling that most of the members of our delegation who participated in this ceremony in Independence, Missouri, they're no longer with us. Probably now Robert Kupiecki, my good friend, who is a deputy foreign minister, Robert was there. Ambassador Grudziński, but some of key colleagues basically are no longer here. So they cannot see this kind of a tremendous success which we achieved. Well, that's life. But of course, the joy.
And nothing has changed Poland more than the presence in the Union. But
of course,
it's hard to imagine the way to the Union without being a NATO member first.
Of course.
That's why it was so important.
And I can tell you that, I was very proud when I was serving in NATO, in Afghanistan, visiting Afghanistan several times with other officers and ambassadors. We were running the province of Ghazni, beautiful place in the middle of Afghanistan. And when we were comparing our operation in Ghazni and operation run by other kind of old NATO members, and we were doing absolutely great. I mean, in many cases, we are actually much better organized. Of course, the whole operation in Afghanistan, it's a completely different story. Was it necessary or not? Let's put it aside.
Kosciuszko spirit is still in the Polish army.
Yeah.
Great organization.
Yeah, but this was also for our American friends. This was kind of a living proof that actually we know how to operate in such difficult conditions, and we are not hiding, that we are not running, as in Iraq, in Karbala. I mean, this was when someone was shooting at you, basically, you shoot back. And of course, we went there to help them, maybe not in a very successful way in the end, but this was a proof that we did something right.
Piotr, you mentioned the NATO summit in 1999, which we both happened to be there. But Kasia and Marek also mentioned that it is the 25th anniversary of TVN24. That summit was the first ever nightly newscast that TVN did from abroad. We did the whole newscast from Washington, D.C. We had no idea what we were doing. We had no idea how to do it live from the United States. We did succeed eventually. And that was, some of the gray hair that you see is because of that
story
newscast.
began on this very day.
Yes. But, so also for TVN, it was an amazing event that we covered. But I also want to point out that both the Prime Minister and President of Poland were present there, because the security of Poland is bipartisan. And we need to repeat this over and over again ad infinitum.
Like NATO enlargement, this was bipartisan.
Yep. Yeah. So, Piotr, you mentioned F-35s. TVN24 and Fakty TVN went to Ebbing Air Force Base. And we did a story, 20-minute long, almost a documentary, about training of Polish pilots. And we talked to their American instructors, and they were singing praises about Polish pilots. This is where we are today. We are not only a member of NATO, we are a praised member of NATO. You asked about this different perspective that Americans have on Poland. Percentage-wise, we pay for our defenses more than the United States. And this is also something that people who are interested a bit in security, in NATO, and transatlantic relations, those people know it, they notice it. So we are a powerhouse, we are almost like a NATO poster boy.
Yeah, and I remember, Marcin, we were both making stories about Fort Worth, Texas, this factory where F-16s were built 25 years ago. And this is the same factory where they were making Liberators, these incredible aircrafts that were, during the Second World War, bringing help to fighting people during the Warsaw Uprising. And these people in this factory still remember that story. This is truly amazing. But I want to ask you, gentlemen, I asked about it, Marcin, what's your perception, what's your angle, how the image of Poland has changed over last 25 years?
I agree with Marcin about the Polish jokes, but also Poland's activity in NATO is a big part of it. Of course, the economic success, the Polish phenomenon of the economy growing. But, 20 years ago, I flew to Iraq with General Gongor, who was the chief of staff, together with the Polish officers that were going into the international zone, because there was the one zone was controlled by the American Army, the other one by the British, and the international zone. So we flew with Gongor there, and I'm in the plane with him, and I said, why are you flying to fight in Iraq? Iraq never did anything to Poland. And he said, we're going there to learn. We're going there to learn the methods of combat that the Americans will teach us. Because we know that someday Russia will attack us again, because they've attacked us over and over for the centuries. I asked General Polko the same question. What did you learn from the Americans? He said, leave no man behind. Every soldier counts. If they're wounded, they're dead, make sure we take them with us. The Russians treat soldiers like cannon fodder. They just leave them, they throw them into the bullets and drop them. He said this is a different mentality. So the Polish military switched with that mentality. And the fact that you mentioned that they're now paying this 5% in NATO, the fact that they're standing up, when the war started in Ukraine, Poland is now the launching base for all of the aid that's coming from the United States and Western Europe. It's going through Rzeszów, it's going through the border to Ukraine to help the Ukrainians. And I think that is a big part of it. But also when you see pictures of Poland now, my God, people who go to Poland come back, and it's just like, wow, it's this beautiful...
Some of them don't want to come back.
Some of them don't want to come back.
Some of them want to stay in Poland.
That's right.
And it's true.
So it's the economic miracle. Poland's economic miracle is a big part of it. Success breeds success.
Alex, let's follow on that issue, because, there were millions of people coming from Poland to the United States over the century. As far as I understand, that story is over.
They're not coming anymore. They have better jobs. In fact, they went, and you mentioned the EU, which was very good. Poland's economy was helped by its membership in the EU. And 500,000 Poles went to Ireland to work. And I think it was like 1 million of them went to Great Britain. And now you keep seeing stories on the news, on different news channels that, I'm going back and opening companies in Poland, in Warsaw. And they're having much more success in Poland. Poland's economy is booming more than Great Britain. So all those Poles that were in England now went back to Poland. They're getting better jobs. They're starting companies. And that's playing a big role.
Well, we have kind of funny element because our consulate here in Chicago, they're overwhelmed with applicants actually asking for Polish citizenship. And, for a relatively small consulate with very limited budget, suddenly there are, hundreds, if not thousands of applicants, and some of this paperwork is more difficult, some is a bit easier, but still, this is, the number is growing, and we have quite liberal, actually, citizenship law. So this is new phenomenon.
Jesse Eisenberg, right, Heather?
Yeah.
He became a Polish citizen a year and a half ago. And I'm not joking when I'm saying that some Americans who visit Poland stay in Poland. When I go back to my hometown, to Krakow, I get to know more and more Americans who moved to Krakow and are staying in Krakow forever. This is their place to live. So I'm not trying to say that it totally reversed now. No, definitely not. America is still a magnet when it comes to business, when it comes to science, to academic studies. Of course, America is a huge magnet. But Poland is definitely one of the most attractive places in Europe for Americans now.
If Warner Brothers would be alive, they would get back to Poland to work at TVN, right? Gentlemen, I think we have enough evidence to back the theory up that you can't find any better alliance than Polish-American alliance, right? That's true. Long live Polish-American alliance, and God bless America. Just a couple of days before the 250th anniversary.
For your freedom and ours.
Exactly, for your freedom and ours. Thank you so much. Bardzo dziękuję Państwu. Thank you, gentlemen.